Have you ever seen this phrase go around, HR is not your friend? Well, I'm an ex-HR employee. I took a lot of HR classes, and I'm going to get into the deeper reason as to why HR is not your friend, because there are a lot of legal employers and legal employment law people here on YouTube who make their opinions about the legal reasons why HR is not your friend, but there's a deeper reason why, and we're going to get into it. So you've seen this phrase go around on social media, right? If you have Twitter, if you have Instagram, YouTube, HR is not your friend this, HR is not your friend that. But why do we say that, right? I mean, there are a lot of reasons, but I'm going to give you my reason here in this video because it's hard to notice a toxic relationship between employer and employee because of the way the narrative is framed. And so what is that narrative? I really want you to put the shoes on of someone who just started a job. What happens, especially in an office job? And so when you first get offered your position, HR presents you with an offer letter, right? Because they have their recruiter send out the offer letter instead of the manager usually. And so the offer letter usually says something like, congratulations, you've been selected as the top candidate. Here's your salary offer. And so we think, ooh, congratulations, like, yay, I've made it through the beauty pageant that is called interviews, and now I get some money, right? So many positive things going on at this beginning stage of the game when you're first introduced to HR. And then on your first day, when they have orientation, HR greets you in orientation to inform you about your employee perks and your benefits. So these can be things like health benefits, dental benefits, if they give you benefits for mental health. And also it can expand to other things like employee perks such as, workplace gym, or maybe they subsidize some of your education. Those are some things that HR will talk about in orientation. So let's continue. And then finally, they let you know that they are the go-to people if you ever have an issue at work. And so all of these great things that they're letting you know about, and so they seem pretty friendly so far, right? Eyes emoji. Why do we have that eyes emoji? Because there's something deeper that I want you to remember. Remember this. Everything that belongs to the company will be managed in the interest of profit. And so we often think, they have an HR. They must be on my side. But nope, it must be there for profit. And so everything that is going to be owned by the company is going to be managed for profit, including you. You really want to remember this because you are a human resource. Let's get into that. And so you belong to the company, right? You signed a contract that says, I'm going to give you this percentage of my time, so that way you give me this amount of pay, right? It's a relationship between employer and employee, but usually it's better for the employer than it is for the employee. But you are there so you can produce value. That's why you signed the contract. You said, here's my time. I'll do what you want me to do. You just give me the money. And usually they make a profit out of you. And so in essence, because they are trying to run a business, you are a human resource. Just like if it was a woodworking company, wood would be a resource for that company. But also companies need humans to do jobs too. Like if you work in an office, if you have a customer service representative center, the resources of the company are human ones. And so that's why it's called human resources. And so that's why the HR department is there to manage the company's human resources, because there is a lot of management that is required out of a human resources team because work has become so complex as we go through the 20th century, at the end of the 20th century, and then going into the 2020s especially, like, oh my God, it's only getting more complex. And we're going to talk about that. And so because of this naming convention that often confuses us, we think that because of the department name, that the HR department is a resource for the humans there at work, right? However, it's the other way around. It's a department that are managing the human resource. It's not a resource for us. The company is managing its human resources. So let's get into that. So to understand the true function of HR, we need to review it in a historical context, because HR departments didn't just start out of nowhere. There's a historical reason why HR departments started showing up, because throughout history, HR departments are relatively new, maybe like 60s, 70s, and we're going to get into it right here. So in the 1970s and 80s, the human resources management movement took off. And so at the time, activists wanted better working conditions because there was a lot of activism at the time. And of course, working conditions are on their platter of demands. And so, following the spurt of activism during the 1960s and 1970s, workplaces saw massive changes in the 1980s. So, you can see here we have a picture of UC Berkeley, which is where I went to school and used to work. And there's the free speech movement in the 1960s. And so, of course, because of that, spirit of activism at the time, of course, it's going to follow that workplaces are going to start to be activists for themselves as well, right? And so more and more companies began creating HR departments as a direct response. Interesting, right? And so if their development was a result of worker concerns, then they must be on our side, right? Mm-hmm. Not really. So let's explore even further. So now we got the eyes emoji with the magnifying glass because we're about to dig in deep. And so if you do any reading at the start of the 20th century, writers from that era, and they were talking about work and labor, this is what they were talking about. Work at the start of the 20th century was all about the factory. So if you read stuff from the capitalists, but even the communists, they were all talking about factory labor because factory labor was like the heart and soul of production at the time, right? And so at the time, workers produced results with their hands. They needed to use their hands to produce value, to produce the equipment that they were making, or to produce whatever it is that they were doing, right? Hands were needed, hands. And so it wasn't always like that, though. As time went on, new technologies were introduced to the world, right? So in the 1950s, we saw Xerox machines for the first time. And then we eventually saw computers with software that were put into companies for the employees to use. And then also throughout the century, the 20th century, there were just so many telecommunication options people never would have imagined. So you can imagine, as time went on, every household got a telephone, a TV, a radio, so many different ways of communicating with other humans. And so, of course, because we have all of this new technology, we need to transform the way that work and jobs are, right? And so that's why we saw a big transition from factory to now office labor, which we're going to analyze now. So with new tech came new jobs. Does that sound curious? Because right now there's a lot of new tech coming about, which is AI, and a lot of people are thinking, oh my God, is my job going to be replaced by AI? We'll talk about that. So no longer was everyone destined to work in a factory because that wasn't the dominant mode of work anymore. Now we had offices, we had customer service calling centers, we had so many things, typing centers. So let's get into this. So people were placed in cubicles, like this little guy from Office Space, if you've seen that movie. I plan on doing a really critical analysis of this movie, Office Space. For anyone interested in like quitting their jobs and leaving their office job, I'm going to do an analysis of this movie. Let me know if you're interested in that in the comments. And then people were required to talk to customers on the phone. So we have Pam here from The Office, which is another hit show that I really love. The Office is great. And then people were assigned to projects with their teammates. And so here we have another clip or screenshot from Office Space, the movie, where they get really angry and they decide to team up and destroy the office printer, which is a very significant moment in the movie for me because that has a lot of symbolism right there. And so as we can see, as we moved to the office, there were so many things where you had to use different parts of your brain and your mind. And so hands, as opposed to factory work, hands were no longer the sole requirement for producing value, right? Are we starting to see that? And so employees were now expected to use their hands, their minds, and their hearts on the job. Just because office work is so complex, it requires us to do projects, communicate with people, meet deadlines. It became so much more different. And so we needed our hands, our hearts, and our minds to communicate, to persuade, and to think. And so in a way, this type of work seems way more attractive to us, right? Because it's like we're doing different things. We're not just in a factory doing the same thing over and over again, right? It seems more intriguing to us. It gives us the opportunity to use our creative and strategic minds in our daily lives. And so my mom and my dad were a grocery store employee and a barber, respectively. And so their jobs were very menial tasks every day, on their feet every day. And so after college, when they found out, oh, you work in an office? Wow, I'm so proud of my son. Like they were really happy for me for having a job that I just found miserable at the end of the day, you know? So it really is just a different frame of mind, but for some reason, office work as opposed to menial labor just makes us feel more like we're doing more as a human. I don't know, I can't really explain it, but it's part of this reason because it uses different parts of our mind and our soul in our job. And so factory work, on the other hand, appears to dehumanize us because it makes us feel like one-dimensional creatures. And so in this book by Kathy Weeks, The Problem with Work, the workplace revamp was fueled by, quotes, the publication in 1973 of a government study that found widespread dissatisfaction and disaffection among US workers. So what did that government study say? The quote continues. It says, dual, repetitive, seemingly meaningless tasks are causing discontent among workers at all occupational levels. So basically, it's just saying that these repetitive tasks are making people dissatisfied with their job. And it's curious that at the time the government was looking into this because I guess they just wanted to keep people at work happier. And why do they want us happier? We're gonna delve into that. And so office work, as opposed to factory labor, has a curious way of making us feel human again, as our multifaceted nature actually gets put to use. So we were talking about that. Instead of just using our hands and our arms all day, we're using our minds, we're communicating with people, teamwork, collaboration. So these multifaceted jobs makes us feel a little bit different than factory work did, right? And so although we are resources for the company, we are at least being acknowledged as human ones. Quote from the book again, The Problem with Work, quote, empowered to develop our capacities and maximize value at the same time. Right? They encourage us nowadays. HR departments encourage us to explore our talents, to further our education. That's why they offer these programs, so that way you can produce more value for the company. So as workplaces became more complex, HR departments started to become an essential part of business strategy. And HR is not just like this good for the world, it's a business strategy. And we're going to talk about that. Because now, if companies were expected to satisfy a person's needs, their human needs holistically, such as their growth, their fulfillment, their belonging, right? They needed a way to manage all of this because it is hard. It is hard to really make sure that an employee is engaged 24/7. And if they failed to nurture their employees and keep them engaged, everyone would leave their jobs and profits would become non-existent. That is why HR is so important, because they need a way to make employees feel at home with the culture, you know? And so in every HR management course that I've ever taken, this was the frame the conversation took place in. Profit, right? Because HR was not just something that we needed for the well-being of humanity, it was something that we needed to make money. So keeping people happy at work isn't a mission of bettering humanity, like I just said. Keeping workers happy means greater success for the business. Point blank, period. That's basically all it is, and higher profits for the company stakeholders. That is what HR is all about. And that is why HR is not your friend. We're going to get into it deeper though, because now let's fast forward to the modern era of HR, because a lot has changed with human resources, you know, from the 1970s and 80s from when it started, and now to the 2020s. And I would say HR is even more important now in the 2020s just because of how complex workplaces are becoming, right? And so I used to work in HR for over 5 years at the #1 public university in the world, which is UC Berkeley. I think at the moment they're tied with UCLA, but they're both #1 technically, so whatever. When I first started, the department name was Central HR. Like, ooh, it sounds scary and bunch of suits, right? Central, centralized, wow. However, eventually a new CHRO, a Chief Human Resources Officer, came in and renamed us to people and culture. It sounded way more fluffy, however, it also sounded way more approachable. It's interesting, his transition from central HR to people and culture. Just the naming convention is something that we should really pick apart. And so he wanted to step away from HR, the old school vision of HR as a scary department that solely managed its workers as resources. Because now, people and culture, it doesn't have that tinginess from human resources, right? It's a little bit more approachable. And so, like I say here, the new name made our department seem more approachable, but processes were business as usual. As HR staff, like myself, we were still in service to the organization, not to people's actual wants and needs, which were generally less work and more pay. If you were to ask anyone who has a job right now, go to their workplace right now and ask them, what do you want out of your job? Oh, I want less work and more pay. Well, that's what the needs and wants are of the workers, right? And so if HR was really in service of the employee, that is what they would be advocating for all day instead of like revamping workplace culture, whatever that means. So anyways, if you do a YouTube search of HR is not your friend, you're going to get some results like this guy. So 4 reasons why HR is not your friend, and the thumbnail says employment lawyer explains. So this is coming from the employment law side, and a lot of the videos that you're going to see, especially this next one, also talk about the employment side of the house. However, this person, how HR cheats you, this sounds like way more scary. Like, oh my God, they're cheating me? Wow. And this is actually a really great video. I really do recommend it. And it was really influential in me creating this video. And so if you do a YouTube search for HR is not your friend, you're going to get results like this. You'll get many results from employment lawyers exposing the true nature of HR and their unwillingness to help their employees. But why do they do that, right? So if you have a complaint, HR will try their best to hide it. The videos that I just showed, at least the screenshots of, this is what they talk about. They'll try their best to hide the complaints that you have, which is like the opposite preconceived notion that we have of them. They're like, oh, they're here to help me and listen to my complaints, but no, they'll try their best to hide it. And then they'll listen to you and do their best to seem engaged and empathetic, however, while at the same time making no effort to leave a proper paper trail. Because if they ever get audited and sent to court, of course they're not going to want this paper trail that basically shows all of the negative wrongdoings that happen in the workplace. They're not going to want to show that, right? So to sum up most of these YouTube videos, the main goal of HR is to ensure that you don't sue the company and cost them millions. Because if you do decide to sue your workplace and then you win, they're going to have to pay you so much money, and that's what they want to avoid. And that is one of the functions that HR serves. They basically try to calm down the employees, make sure that their complaints don't go to the legal teams, and that's what they really are trying to do. So I have a friend, Alejandro, just to drive this point home. I have a friend, Alejandro, who went through a tough time in his position when we were working at Berkeley. And so his supervisor didn't respect him. She micromanaged him because she thought her way of doing work was the only way. Does that sound familiar? You ever have a boss like that? She was passive aggressive with him, and there were racist undertones to everything she did. Just a terrible boss. Thankfully, I've never had a boss like this to this degree, but I have had some horrible bosses in the past, and particularly the thing that I didn't like about the bosses that I found horrible in the past was that you tell them an idea of how you can make work more efficient, and they're like, nope, we need to do it my way. Super just not cool, right? So have you ever had a boss like this, like my friend Alejandro's or like my bosses? I'd love to know in the comments just what your experience are with your past supervisors, just because I think we can make a whole video about what makes a good boss versus a bad boss. Maybe that's a good video in the future if you guys are interested. So another coworker of mine, Shirley, previously had the same boss as my friend Alejandro. And so they connected, and then they found out they both shared the same experiences. Even though they were working under this boss at different times, they both shared the same experiences of this negative, nasty boss. And so no one liked this supervisor at the office, but somehow the organization did nothing to stop her. Weird, right? Weird how they're on the side of the managers and supervisors instead of the general working employees. It's like really, really sad. And so my friend Alejandro went through a full-fledged investigation with HR, and I put investigation with quotation marks on the slide because at the end of the day, nothing really happened. Meetings were held and cases were opened, but the only result he got was a reassignment to another supervisor. So weird and, effed up. So in this case, I would argue that HR did its job successfully because Alejandro didn't sue. That's basically what they wanted. So I had lunch with my friend Alejandro about a week ago and we reflected on the situation. And he told me something. He told me that it wasn't all that bad. And I was like, huh, really? I mean, that boss is still there raining her havoc. Like, what the heck? And so he said that he felt heard by his HR representative. He said he felt heard. So was that their goal? All it takes to calm down an employee is to make them feel heard, as if HR is our workplace therapist? Is it really that simple? They just want to make us feel heard and then we're calmed down and then we just go back to work? Really interesting. So stories like my friend Alejandro's are the stories we don't hear when it comes to HR departments. Because when we think of HR, what do we think of? Employee benefits, that's a positive. Employee benefits, oh my God, nice. Diversity initiatives, woo! And then culture creation, whatever that means. And so in a post-pandemic work world where we are expected to integrate our hands, because if you work in an office, you got to type, you got to make your morning coffee with your hands, right? However, we also have to integrate our minds because we're doing a lot of complex work, research, data analytics. We have to use our hearts because we need to connect with people, persuade people, communicate with people, right? And now our own homes we have to integrate into work. So if you have a work from home job, it's kind of blurring the lines between what is my personal life and what is my work life. It's kind of a weird dilemma that I had when I had a work from home job. I didn't like it at all. And this is something new to the world. We've never had to really integrate our homes and our work so much. I mean, in certain instances we have, but with all of this considered, that we have to integrate our hands, hearts, minds, and now our homes, the HR function is needed in business now more than ever. Because work has become so complex for the standard office employee now that businesses really need to put an effort in creating a good workplace culture that makes the employee feel supported by the organization so that way they don't leave and they don't ruin the company profits. So I can only imagine how work and as a result HR will evolve with the new AI technologies being introduced to us. Because like we have seen in history before, as technology evolves, so does work. And so with each evolution, we hope that technology will free us from labor. The robots are going to do it for us. AI is going to do my work. And that also causes, a point of anxiety for us. Like, oh my God, am I going to lose my job because of this new technology in the world, right? But in actuality, work continues to monopolize more and more of our lives. And so I would say, I can't even imagine how different office work must feel now versus when it did in the 1960s, 70s. I just can't imagine it. I feel like because of the less technology, there was probably less surveillance of the employees, less chatting, less emailing. And now we feel like even if we're off the clock, I'm still getting notifications in my phone from the email and the pings. And it's like work is monopolizing so much of our life. And that's in part due to technology. But why do we accept this control over our short lifespans, right? Is it because we think we have friends that are on our side? Our HR buddies? Is that really why? Because HR tries to be our friends so we stay happy at work, so we stay with the organization, so we stay keeping the business afloat. They provide so much more than health benefits to us nowadays. You can get your education subsidized. You can get, mental health therapy subsidized now. So many things. Workplaces will pay for your professional development. I've definitely taken advantage of those programs when I was an office employee. So it's an opportunity to further your education so you can provide more value to to the organization, right? It's kind of an interesting trade-off. And we have wellness days that make you feel like you have a work-life balance. Woo, that one wellness day out of the month that HR sponsors, so that way it makes you feel better at work. That 1 hour out of the entire work week where you gather around in the lunchroom to talk about wellness with your other employees that you don't care about. Interesting. And then we have diversity initiatives that remind us that we too, as minorities, belong in the institution. We belong here. You belong here. Everyone belongs here. Everyone belongs here at work to do your calling, which is to make profit for the business. That's my calling, really. And so it's interesting because now in this day and age, we are encouraged to bring our authentic self to the workplace, whatever that means. On the slide here, I have the pride flag because, bringing your authentic self is often associated with, bringing your gender and your sexual identity and being comfortable with that in the workplace. But, don't be your authentic self if a coworker or a customer disrespects you and pisses you off. That's not when you should be your authentic self to the employer. Because what do they tell you? Be professional. Interesting, right? So objectively, the benefits that HR offers to us are great. Health plans, employee perks, gyms at the office, whatever it is. However, we should always seek out jobs with the best working conditions, of course, not just the best salaries. So if you're on the job market right now, I know it's going to be hard to find a job that doesn't monopolize all of your life, but you really need to do your research and see which employment places will offer you the best quality of life. Like, are you looking for a gym in the office? Are you looking for an office that's going to subsidize your education? Are you looking for an office place that's chill? Are you looking for an office place that's, going to teach you a lot? There are things that you need to consider that's outside of the salary because you also want to think about your personal well-being. So even though there are good benefits to having HR departments now, I bring up these points to highlight the bigger picture as to why HR is not really our friends. And my argument is that because workplaces have become so complex, employers need HR departments to create a workplace culture where they feel the employee is not going to get burned out and not going to quit and not going to ruin the profits. So as opposed to the other videos that argue that the main HR function is to prevent lawsuits, my thesis is about the bigger historical development and strategic development of HR management in business. Because this is not a necessary to have when you start a business. You don't need an HR team. But as your business grows, you do need to implement HR strategy as a business strategy, because otherwise you're just going to have a workplace that unionizes, revolts, and then your business just goes to shatters, right? So HR management is not just a necessity, it's a business strategy. It's tactical. It's not just something that is natural to human nature. It's actually a business capitalist strategy. So maintaining an effective HR department is a necessary business strategy for all corporations to increase their profits, to prevent legal disaster, and the most scary part, maintain control over our lives. So if you buy that book, The Problem with Work by Kathy Weeks, there's a lot of great nuggets of information if you're interested in this, work historical development. But as Kathy Weeks states, this is a great quotation, quote, "Whether or not the watchwords of such programs, empowerment, participation, responsibility, flexibility, and enrichment involved empty rhetoric or meaningful improvements in the experience of work for employees, they do give employers opportunities to induce new modes and degrees of effort, and in some cases of identification. Thus, worker empowerment can boost efficiency. Flexibility can serve as a way to cut costs, and participation can produce commitment to the organization. So in short, often programs presented under the rubric of work enrichment are also methods of work intensification. In kind of a bad dialectic, quality becomes quantity as the call for better work is translated into a requirement for more work. So haven't you ever heard those terms in the workplace? Empowerment, flexibility, participation, right? Oh, we're going to empower you so you do your work faster. Flexibility, please be flexible. Take on this extra task. I'm asking you to be flexible, even though it wasn't originally a part of your assigned work duties. Participation, hey, would you like to participate in this opportunity? Basically, they're asking, hey, do you want to do more work? Right? These words that they use in HR are so fluffy, they make us feel good, but at the end of the day, they're really intensifying the work that we're already doing. So this quotation blew my mind when I read it. I read it again and again because it was just so powerful, and I had to put the whole thing on the presentation because I really wanted to dig this point across, is that workplace culture improvements are also on the same side of, or on the different side of the coin, the method of increasing your work. So when I was working in HR, I was surrounded by all of these managerial discourses in their attempt to create a successful workplace culture. But what does workplace culture even mean? Like, I'd love to hear your experiences with your workplace cultures in the comments, because to me, it always seemed like a vague idea full of empty promises. And I still kind of feel like that, but after reading this book, it's made me realize that workplace culture is about improving the workplace so that way we can do more work. That's basically my idea of it now, but I'd love to hear what your workplace cultures are like at the moment. So after realizing the sad reality of HR, I decided to leave and pursue my own path in life outside of a big organization, because I was working at UC Berkeley, which is a huge organization, and I just couldn't take it anymore. I had a job after that as well at another college campus, but I was basically just done with working with a big office. So having a typical office job is the right fit for some people, but not for me. I'm really glad I decided that in my 20s, because now I'm on my way to do something bigger and better. So now what am I doing? I am a quit your job career and life coach. So I help people who are unhappy in the typical 9 to 5 path mentally prepare for the scary task of quitting a job and seeking out their own creative endeavors. Because when you're thinking about quitting a job, what do you do every day? You wake up for work and you're like, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this. And when you wake up like that every day for a week, and then a week turns into a month, and then a month turns into 3 months, I just couldn't take it anymore. I quit a job after 3 months because I was waking unhappy every day. And I know that if you're in that frame of mind, you're waking up sad, you're waking up depressed, maybe there's a little bit of crying in there, maybe there's like bad eating habits, but it really just destroys your health. And so in my coaching program, I'm going to learn how to fire your motivation to eventually make the decision to quit your job. We're going to talk about what you're going to do after your job. We're going to start your own business. We're going to start a YouTube channel. We're going to get you another job. We're going to work to create a better path for you. And then we're going to create a life that you truly want to live. That is what I help people in my coaching programs. So if that sounds like you, I'd love to work with you to bring your creative dream to life. So check out therichbench.com for more information. If you want to become a rich bench, you're tired of this typical 9 to 5 nonsense, and like this video if you got value. Value meaning you learned something, you had a little chuckle, maybe a little cry because you felt emotional about your job. If you found this video valuable to you, like the video, and I'll see you in the next one, friend.